Good day. I'm going to do a Q&A here today. Answer all your questions, or as many as I possibly can. There are some from the summer that I did not address, and I will address those now, ones that are relevant still. First question was, in the summertime, David asked how was the tent. Tent held up really well. I'm so impressed with Hilleberg tents. Definitely would recommend getting one if you're looking for a decent quality tent and a top quality tent, and you don't mind paying a bit for it. It's the best tent I've ever owned. So Roxanne had asked a few questions. First was about the ticks that I had dealt with in Ontario and Manitoba. Even in Saskatchewan I did have a few. She had said, "I've not seen a tick in Alberta in 48 years, not cycling, off-road, nor hiking. Have you?" Yes, I have. They're rare in Alberta, but they are there. I know a fellow that got Lyme disease in Alberta, and yeah, they're not often found, but I did get one myself in the south, in Kananaskis country. So how did you end up as a dental hygienist? Well, for those of you that don't know, I was a dental hygienist for a long time, majority of my working adult career, and it was not a very interesting story. I was in the military. They had offered me a position as a dental assistant, and shortly after doing that I knew I wanted to continue on with something different. I wanted to get more education, and then when I had a family, I just knew I had to earn a little bit more and be a little more self-sufficient. So I didn't want to get into dentistry. I didn't want to become a dentist as the military had hoped I would. So when I got out of the military, I went back to school as a dental hygienist. Worked out well for me. I was a single dad most of my life, and it was great that I was home with my children every evening and didn't have to work weekends, that sort of thing. So I hear you talk about your adventures, future adventures, but how does your career fit in? You know, I'm planning a lot of future adventures, obviously, but whether or not I was in dentistry, I don't think it would make a difference. I'd find ways of making it work, but I don't plan on going back into dentistry at all. I want to change things up. I'm still a young enough guy that I can change careers and do something different, and I don't plan on retiring at 60 or 65. I want to work as long as I'm physically capable, and yeah, I'm going to change it up, do something different. Crystal had asked, what was the most difficult thing you experienced since you began the walk? Well, hands down, two kind of instances or experiences that I had stand out more than anything else. One was when I had the flash freeze in New Brunswick. You know, it was caught me off guard, something I had never experienced before in my life, and I was wet at the time, so I got really cold, dropped down to minus 27 degrees that night, and I just couldn't warm up. I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to wake up in the morning. Yeah, doesn't matter what I did. Jumped around, I made some hot soup and tea, and I just couldn't warm up. Was afraid that I wasn't going to wake up in the morning, but thankfully I did, so it all worked out in the end. And the second experience was definitely the tornado that touched down just south of me in Saskatchewan. Again, I thought my number was up that night, but it passed. I woke up in the morning and it's all history now. What problems do you have, or did I have physically? You know, I've been very, very fortunate, and outside of some achiness and soreness, I didn't get any foot problems really. No blisters the entire trip. I had some hot spots and a couple of spots that bled for me way back when, but I've been very fortunate guy. Okay, lots of questions from Sadie. She had asked me a bunch of questions once I finished up, and the first was, what does New Year's Eve 2021 look like when January 1st begins with a cross-country walk? My plans changed dramatically. I had intended on flying to Newfoundland into St. John's on the 30th, which I did, and then I was going to do a little partying on the 31st on George Street in St. John's. I was going to stay in a hostel downtown, and unfortunately, because of COVID, there were none of the pubs were open, and I had to self-isolate for 5 days. So when I arrived in in St. John's. I just isolated until the third, and then the fourth I started walking out. Were my family and friends instantly on board with my adventure, or did some of them take some time to get on board? You know, my friends, close friends, and my family all knew me well enough that it wasn't that big a surprise for them. I think some of them might have secretly thought I was a crazy, but I think the majority of people, especially especially my kids, my family, they knew what kind of person I am, and they were on board with it right away. What was the longest you've walked consecutively before this journey began? My first Camino de Santiago in Spain was, I started in Seville and walked north and then west to the coast, and that was about 1,150, 1,200 kilometers. I did that back in 2011, I believe, and yeah, that was the longest one I had done before that, although it was very different. I stayed in hostels every night, had a much lighter pack. There were restaurants all along the way. It was very different, but yeah, that was the longest I had done before. What restaurant along the way was so good that it almost made walking back worthwhile? You know, there were a lot of really simple restaurants that I had good experiences in, that the burgers were great, or breakfast, bacon and eggs were fantastic. I didn't have any elaborate meals while I was walking, really. There was a good restaurant in Thunder Bay that or not, in Kenora, Ontario, sorry, that I went to, that was called the Boathouse, and I had a fantastic steak there. But really what stands out in my mind was a restaurant near Uppsala, just east of Uppsala. There was a motel and restaurant that was just mom and pop kind of place. I think it was called the Black Pine or the Black Spruce Motel. Can't remember the name of the restaurant itself, but the experience was fantastic. Not just because the food was good, it was great. Burger and fries that I had in the evening, and then I came back again in the morning for bacon and eggs. But the people there just made it the most memorable eating experience I've had along the way. So if you're ever passing through Uppsala and you're looking for a great place to eat, definitely recommend stopping in there. It was fantastic. Who was the most interesting character that you met along the way? Oh, I had many interesting characters. So a lot of homeless guys that were walking, hitchhiking, walking across the country, and but the person that stands out most in my mind, and maybe this is because it was just a little fresher in my memory, was a fellow in Hope. He was from Agassiz. I can't remember his name. Don, I think. I met him and his wife. They were just wandering around town, and he started chatting with me, and he was just a real character. Told me all about his backpacking and hiking adventures when he was a young guy, and sleeping on train tracks and all over Newfoundland, or sorry, all over Australia and New Zealand. And yeah, he was just a real character, and I remember him most of all. Do you have any adventurers that you look up to, modern or historic? Ernest Shackleton, maybe. You know, the guy that stands out most in my mind is a modern explorer. He's younger than me. I just love his outlook on life, and his filmmaking is amazing. And his name is Beau Miles. He's from Australia, and he's done some amazing paddling adventures. But I really admire him for his sense of adventure in his area. You know, local adventures that he goes on, just a long run or a long hike, or yeah, just if you haven't seen him before, I definitely recommend checking him out on YouTube. He's got a great channel. Interesting character, real nice guy. Do you walk with headphones while listening, or sorry, do you wear headphones while walking, listening to music or audiobooks, or keep things quiet and listen to nature? You know, I listen to podcasts or a little bit of music when I'm in my tent at night, but during the day when I'm walking, I don't listen to anything. Not only do I like being in the moment and just being inside of my head, but for safety reasons, I think it would have been dangerous to walk on the side of the highway with music blaring or something like that. So no, I just I'm in the moment. I'll listen to what's happening around me. What was the longest stretch without cell service, and did you ever run out of battery? Longest stretch, I think, was in Northern Ontario, going into Wawa. Yeah, it must have been close to 200 kilometers without any cell service. And surprisingly, I didn't run out of battery then, but I did run out of battery a couple of times, mostly because of carelessness or the cold. Things got cold and the batteries died. But for the most part, I had battery all along, and those few days that I dealt without cell service were not a big deal. So how does one survive when every day is a leg day? Every day was a leg day. Your muscles become more and more accustomed to it every day. And although I still had sore muscles, I was tired, and my feet especially were sore every day. They were achy every night when I climbed into my sleeping bag. Yeah, you become accustomed to it. That's all I can say. Just another day, another job. What's the next adventure? Well, I have some bigger ones that I'd like to do, but a lot of it's going to depend on when I can afford to do them again. Definitely want to go back to Spain and do another Camino or two. I would love to do a walk from my hometown here right up to Whitehorse, but for the moment I'm going to be content with smaller adventures, just snowshoeing in my neighborhood here, hiking and paddling next summer, most likely just in the Rockies and in my near vicinity. What was the hottest day and the coldest day? The coldest, I had a few days that were in the minus 27, 28 range, and that was all in Newfoundland and all in the Maritimes. I had a few times that were that cold. And the hottest day was, I think I reached, honestly I don't remember. I have to look back in my log, in my book here. I think I reached 40 degrees a couple of times on the prairies in Saskatchewan. And again, you become accustomed to these temperatures. The reason that the flash freeze stands out is because it was such a swing in a short period of time. I went from +8 and rain to -10 in a matter of minutes. It was so fast, and it just kept dropping, and I got down to -27 that night, and that really stands out in my memory because it went from extreme to extreme. Luca had asked where I live. I live in Salmon Arm. That's in the Shuswap area of British Columbia in the interior. And what kind of wildlife did I see while I was walking? Surprisingly, Theo, or Luca, I didn't see nearly as much wildlife as I had anticipated. So I thought I'd see a lot more bears. I thought I'd see a lot more moose than I did in Northern Ontario especially. I didn't see one elk when I was walking, which is really bizarre because I always see them when I'm driving through the Rockies, but I didn't see one as I was walking. Not nearly as much as I thought I would, but I did get to know a lot more birds, songbirds, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, didn't see as much as I had anticipated I would. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It would have been nice to experience a lot more, but I'm glad that I was safe the entire time. I didn't have to worry about any bears, cougars, none of that. Anonymous asked me a few questions here. What was my total distance? I don't know exactly, but I know it was around 7,000 kilometers. It might have been around 72, might have been a little less than 7,000, but around 7,000 kilometers. And my average kilometers per day, on the prairies, I was easily covering 35, 40 kilometers a day. There were a lot of times that I was doing much more than that. In the winter time, I was probably only doing about 25 or 30 kilometers. So it varied on the temperature, the time of year, and mostly it depended on the daylight that I had, because as I got into British Columbia, I had plenty of energy. I could have kept going longer most days, but I had to pack it in because I was running out of daylight. How much did the whole adventure cost? Well, it's a really tough one because I still had bills and obligations that I had to pay for while I was gone. You know, insurance. I had to pay for lot rental on my tiny house, and yeah, I had expenses beforehand. I think for what I spent the entire trip, including my expenses back at home and the food and hotels and all that kind of stuff, I could have bought a brand new compact car or a small SUV. So yeah, we're looking in the $30,000 range Canadian. But if we didn't have all those expenses, those obligations that I had beforehand, and you wanted to minimize your costs, I think it could easily be done for $15,000 or $20,000. Yeah. How many boots, shoes did I go through? Well, I had a pair of winter boots that I started out with, and I still have those. They still are going to work for me. I didn't wear those out. And then I started the trip in Ontario in some worn out boots similar to these. Same make, model, all that kind of stuff. They were Keen Pyrenees, and they were well broken in. So those and 2 other pairs, so 2.5, 3 pairs that I wore out while I was gone, something like that. They were all Keens, even my winter boots. I love Keens. I will talk more about my boots and foot care, footwear in a separate video that I'm going to just title Foot Care. Paul had asked, what about weight distribution carrying 40 to 50 pounds a day? I am assuming you're asking how I packed my pack. You know, I kept the heavy stuff low and close to my body. That's usually the wisest way to do it. You keep the weight close to your body and low. I hope that answers the question. You know, there were a lot of days that I'm sure that I was just under 40 pounds. You know, definitely under 20 kilos. But majority of the days I carried 20 plus kilos, 20. I'm sure there were days that I had more than 25 kilos when I was carrying lots of water, lots of fluids on the prairies. But yeah, you roll with it. And how were you able to walk 40 plus kilometers a day? You just become conditioned to it. You know, you don't start out walking that many kilometers in a day, but it's not really that difficult when you put things into, break things down into small increments. You know, if you're able to walk 5 kilometers a day on average, or sorry, 5 kilometers an hour on average, and you've got 10 hours plus hours of daylight, it's not inconceivable to walk 50 plus kilometers in a day. When I had, you know, 8 hours of daylight, that included all my stops and breaks and setting up and tearing down camp. Obviously I couldn't do that many kilometers in a day, and I was walking a lot slower sometimes. Sometimes I'd start out walking 5.5, 6 kilometers an hour, and then by the end of the day you're pooped out. You're only walking 4.5 kilometers an hour. So yeah, that's how you do it. It's just a matter of conditioning and get yourself built up to that. It's not that big a deal, really. It's like having a job, full-time job. You know, Theo had asked a question. He was putting all the dates together and figuring things out, and had asked, you know, if I left just after Christmas, around New Year's, and walked until Thanksgiving or thereabouts, and with the beard and all that kind of stuff, he was wondering if I was Santa Claus. So no comment, Theo. So last question is, David asked me, since I got back, how difficult it is to adjust to normal life again. And not only is it difficult, but that's a difficult question to answer. Yeah, I've had a hard time, truthfully, and for a number of reasons. You know, I miss everything about the trip. I miss living outdoors and walking every day and meeting people and all the beautiful things that I got to see. But it's tough accepting society as it is when you get back, you know, after living such an ideal. So it's been a challenge, but I'm going to roll with it, and I'll get back to normal again eventually, and hopefully find a nice balance between the ideal that I was living on the road and fitting into regular modern life. So So I hope that answers all your questions. If you have any more questions for me, feel free to leave them down in the comments or DM me on Instagram. I'll try and get to all the questions. I'll answer as many as I can, or all of them. And appreciate you hanging out with me again this week. I will see you again next week. Cheers.